right, so it's 8:30. Let's start. Okay, 8:30. Let's start. Come. Just to start off with, hi, my name is Serene. For those of you who don't know, this is the panel I've been running every month. It's called the Serene View. I run it on all kinds of different topics, and the whole idea is very simple, which is I bring together a couple of experts so that they can share their expert opinions. I try to get people with different viewpoints so that you can really get into the meat of the issue and get a clear picture of what it is. Okay, so this month I'm looking at language, and I've invited three fabulous ladies. This is the first time I'm doing an all ladies panel, and I'm like stoked. We have Heather Hansen, which of course is the fabulous Heather Hansen. She's been on TEDx. She's been on TEDx to tell people to speak bad English. So I officially tell people, yes, you should speak bad English. She speaks about how can you speak globally and be understood everywhere. She helps people to correct their accent, correct their communication to be totally clear. So she's a global communication specialist, yes. And so she's, I think, I've termed her the language maximizer. In the blurb, because she's the one that makes all the languages possible. Like, oh, whatever you speak is fine. Yeah. You're doing good. Forget about the Queen. You're doing good. So yes. Then next we have Adele Hang. Adele Hang, yes. So Adele Hang, as you have just recently heard, is Miss Hong Kong and Greater China. She's also a speech pathologist, right? A speech pathologist and a voice therapist. So a speech pathologist is like one level up from a speech therapist, right? And then a voice therapist, so when she asked me to introduce her, I'm like, so what's the difference between a speech therapist and a voice therapist? So today she will tell us during this panel, if you're also wondering just like me. And she did like a huge career change, and now she's chief of staff at GSK. Still vetting how people are talking, and she's still like, frowning on them. But she's still helping, keynote speakers to be able to speak well, to use your voice. So if you want to use your voice, use your speech, she's the person to go to. And then thirdly, we have Diane Chang. Diane Chang has been a master educator, so she's been teaching kids, she's been teaching teachers, she's been developing curriculum for the last 8 years, since 2011. On top of that, for the last 10 years, she's been helping companies to be able to look at their language, their outgoing communication, to ensure there's no linguistic, cultural conflicts. So these are the three people that we've invited. And the topic today is very simple, which is global language. And what is that? Which is we often speak. We speak English and we think, wow, English is a global language. But a lot of the times when we communicate, we are not properly understood. Or there's some strange misunderstanding that shouldn't happen. So what can we really do to communicate globally and to communicate to the world? So shall I invite Heather to start off this topic?
Sure. It's my favorite topic. It's my favorite thing to talk about. You'll have to stop me when I keep going on and on. Well, you did. Thank you for the nice introduction, Serene. And I love my new title of the Language Maximizer. How fabulous is that? You mentioned my TED Talk, and what I did in that TEDx was I was talking about how to speak bad English perfectly. And the real point behind that was that so many people come to me and say, oh, my English is so bad. My English is so bad. And I want to speak perfect. I want to speak perfect English. And I want to sound like you. I want to sound, or the Queen of England, or whoever their model is, right? And what my message really is that the more we're worrying about being perfect and living up to some ideal standard, which actually doesn't exist, we're wasting a lot of time in the workplace. We're hiding behind fears of not adding up, of not being able to present ourselves powerfully. We aren't speaking up in meetings, especially for people who have learned English as a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth language. They are holding themselves back, thinking they need to live up to some ideal. At the same time, we have people who only have English as a language, who seem to take some kind of ownership over that language. And there is a very real judgment in the world when it comes to how we're speaking and interacting. So when we're looking at the global English communication picture in multinational companies throughout the world and intercultural teams, there's really a lot for us to talk about tonight. I don't think we can even, get past the tip of the iceberg, because there are so many intercultural issues, as well as linguistic, as well as speech and voice. There are so many different angles and ways we can look at this. But my basic argument for the world is that there is no one correct English. We can't define it. We can't, even if we were to write, and I mean, it would be great to hear Diane's opinions on this, even in our outgoing messages to the world, or even in advertising or marketing messages, we need to know exactly who our target listener is and speak specifically to that person. And the way that I speak to an American is going to be different than the way I speak to a Brit or an Australian or a Singaporean Chinese or a mainland China Chinese. It's going to be phrased differently. I'm going to use different vocabulary in order to communicate in the most effective way. And that doesn't always mean that I'm going to do it by the book in correct, perfect, proper British Queen's English. So that's my, in a nutshell, answer to that question, if I even answered it.
Serene, you're muted.
You're muted, Serene.
Serene, you're muted.
I'm muted. Oh, sorry. I was so afraid that I would like burp, No, I'm just kidding. So I muted myself. No, okay. So what I was going to say is, what about Adele? Because Adele has like lived in different countries. She's worked for multinationals. I mean, what perspective do you bring into this?
Now, my perspective is very simple. But then I think in your introduction, thank you for introducing me in a way, especially the Miss Hong Kong. Yes, hi everybody. And then I think a key thing is from a speech pathologist point of view, which is my background before I changed career. There are so many things about communications we need to talk about. A speech pathologist, to answer your question, Serene, is really to look into how do you learn a language from speaking, writing, spelling, into how do you use your cognitive communications, meaning how do you use your brain to think and process and put it into an appropriate social context so that you can interact with people in a socially appropriate way. And then that would be generally what we talk about from a speech pathology point of view. And from a voice point of view, we also have a lot of, specific techniques. And what the key message for me is really about knowing what strength you have. Some people are really good, in terms of their facial expression. Before they speak, they can just use their face to just tell you a story. Or some people are very good in using their word or their language, the simple, succinct word that they can use. Or some people, they have powerful voice. The moment they stand on stage or the moment you have a conference call with them, they would be able to convince you just within that mere 2-3 seconds. So my core message is know your strength for all of your, sensory motor, oral motor, any communications you could use, and maximize the variation. That would be the key message that I want to talk about tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And Diane, what would you like to add?
Okay, well, what you asked was, what can we do to communicate globally and communicate to the world? And what I'd like to point out is that, and I think the other panelists will agree with me, communication is not only about speaking, but it is also about listening. It is first about listening. So it is about knowing your audience, knowing your purpose, knowing why you're talking, and knowing your context. So you need to know you're in this setting at this time, what is appropriate, what is suitable. So that's your context. Then apart from listening, 3 simple rules. Keep it clear, keep it simple, and keep it real. If you speak authentically, if you have a clear message, you know what you're conveying, then that message comes through. But you also need to be able to convey it in language that people understand. Okay. Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. Anything else the other ladies want to add to it? I mean, I think we have had a few sort of top questions come up to say this, that, I mean, when we talk to the world, we are constantly being judged, whether it is my accent, the quality of my voice, I've been told I sound like a man, for example, or even it is, some faux pas that I'm making inadvertently. So
judgment is different from communication.
Mm.
So understanding someone is not the same as not judging them or judging them based on what they're saying or how they're saying it. They are quite separate issues.
Yeah, being understood versus being accepted or belonging. And I think most people in their communication, they're searching for belonging. And the first step is understanding, but just because they understand you doesn't mean they're going to accept you or the way that you speak or the person that you are. So there are many more hurdles than the linguistic and auditory ones that we're talking about now, right? It's a much more complicated picture with lots of subconscious biases and everything else that come into play. And that's a really true and a very real problem in multinational organizations, and a big reason why we don't see more diversity. And not only gender diversity, but I think we need a lot more language diversity and understanding and acceptance of different accents of the world, different varieties of English, that American English isn't the only English, or British English, or whatever standard variety people want to talk about. So it's a much bigger problem than a lot of companies, especially the larger corporations, really realize. They don't realize how much is in this one issue.
Yeah, and then to add on, I think what is important in a multinational environment is it's about non-native speaking people. Like myself, I'm non-native, and working and living in a place where English is dominating. I think the key thing is for us to actually understand it's okay, resonating to what Heather would be saying, it's really okay not to speak in good English, but as long as you use your effective means to convey yourself, that is okay.
Actually, I beg to differ. Singaporeans, I think some Singaporeans are native English speakers. Not all, but some. There are native English speakers in Singapore. You grew up speaking it. It is your first language. It's the language you think in, the language you dream in, the language you stay in, sleep in, eat in, love in. That is your language. It is a first language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I'm a Hong Konger, so I grew up in Cantonese and Chinese. So I only learned English maybe at 10.
Okay.
The problem is many other places in the world don't even realize that there are native speakers in Singapore. And from a linguistic perspective, although there's a massive debate in the linguistics industry as well as to how to define a native speaker, because when you pick up textbooks or when English teachers are being hired, native speaker usually means Westerner. It means American, British, Canadian, Australian, Irish, if you're lucky. And from a linguistic perspective, Singapore English, Malaysian English, English in the Philippines, India even, there are massive populations who have been born and raised speaking English who consider themselves to be native speakers, and under every form of the definition are native speakers. But people outside of these areas of the world who haven't heard their accent before, aren't familiar with their variety, assume they are not native. And so they get judged as non-native. And then we have even more of a power struggle because they're going, excuse me, just because my English doesn't sound like yours doesn't mean I wasn't fully educated in English and have spoken it my entire life. So we need some really serious changes to the definitions of what are native speakers and non-native and who are included in those circles. Because right now, globally speaking, the Asian varieties of English generally are not included in that definition, unfortunately, and that's a big problem.
I think given enough time, given enough exposure, given enough migration, multinational work, it will happen. It will take a while, but I think given enough time, it's going to happen.
I agree.
But I think the topic is less about, whether we have to differentiate people are native or not native. The fact is, I think whether you're functional or whether you're effective communicator, that would be the key that I think we want to drive into.
Yeah.
Not really, because you can be an effective functional communicator and yet be judged. So your message is coming across, and yet people say, oh, well, they don't really, because, we might not be understanding the message correctly. They're non-native speakers. Or it's from language.
Yeah, appreciate your comment. But then from an MNC, now I work in an MNC. So basically what we really appreciate especially for people who are non-native. We appreciate more about the effective use of any sort of means. It could be written, it could be, just speaking. So it's more about, being effective. And yes, judgment happens every single minute. Therefore, we have a lot of conversations about bias or not. However, I still think effectiveness is the most important thing to call out.
So how do you define effectiveness?
Number one, I think is if you're clear, just like what you actually said in the intro, if you're clear about your message and if the recipient heard with minimal misunderstanding, I think that would be a key, the key fact. That would be number one, functionality. Number two, being effective is also being succinct in conveying a message using minimal duplications of means. The means could be, minimal words to convey single meanings. That is also very important. If you work in an MNC, being a leader, you need to be really succinct and clear to convey your key message.
Yeah.
Can I ask, just from a language user's point of view, the fact is, the biases exist, the judgment exists, So what can I do as someone who is from Singapore, who is not considered native, to be able to, in a way, overcome some of these, by whatever means, whether it has to be, maybe correcting my accent or whatever it is, because I feel that, what happens. I don't know how long the world will take to change, but we live with it now. What can we do to really sound confident or to get our message across and accepted?
To sound confident, you have to be confident. And I think you have no issues with that. You're doing fine. But to not be judged, that's not something we can choose. That's something the world is going to impose. So we do our best and we take whatever comes from the other side.
Yeah. And I think that's why I also, I agree with what you said, Adele, because I think the only thing we can really focus on is being effective communicators ourselves. Right. And like you say, Diane, we can't change or influence how other people are going to look at us or judge us. And so, to answer your question, Serene, I would say, from a linguistic perspective, the things that we can do to ensure that we are best understood globally in spoken communication, because I think we would all agree in written communication and also spoken, we need to be clear, we need to be concise, we need to use simple vocabulary, we shouldn't be using idioms and slang. We need to stay very simple, not dumbing down. People always confuse that. They think, oh, well, I shouldn't have to dumb it down. It's not dumbing down. Einstein has some fantastic quote about if you can't explain something that you know well simply, then you don't know it well enough. And I'm loosely paraphrasing there. So those things we know need to be there. But from a linguistic perspective in pronunciation, the studies that have been done linguistically have shown that we need to have three things in order to be best understood globally, no matter who you're talking to, native, non-native, doesn't matter where they're from in the world. And the first is that your consonant sounds must be absolutely clear, especially a crisp T and a clear R. So leaning towards a more American, what we call a rhotic R, saying car, park, not ka, park, and also having a clear T. So instead of my typical butter, better, water, international, I would say butter, better, water, international. Having that crisp T pronunciation is going to help. So consonants are important. Second is vowels, stretching vowels before voiced endings. And this is getting a bit deep. I don't want to go into the linguistics of it, but if you look at words like cap and cab, the difference is actually the length of the sound, even though it's the same sound. And then the last part is knowing how to break down your messages, knowing where to pause, and then knowing how to stress and emphasize one word in each of those linguistic chunks, what we call thought groups or tonal units. There are a few different names. But if those three things are in order, the linguistic studies are showing that we're going to be able to reduce misunderstandings on a conference call, for example, or on a panel discussion like this, where we don't know where these people are coming from. People could be joining us from all over the world. But keeping our pace clear, using our word endings, articulating our consonants. There's a lot that we can do to increase our clarity in order to be better understood, so that the other person isn't triggered by, oh, it's so frustrating to listen to this person. Oh, why can't this non-native speaker speak proper English? Oh, why this, why that, right? So we can try to circumnavigate the judgments by doing our best to prepare and do the best we can with our own communication. But again, like Diane says, even if you're completely clear, you're going to meet people who just won't make an effort to listen and won't make an effort to accept you. So,
yeah.
What to do?
And then to add on, I think the question is related to how do I sound more confident. Totally agree with your point. I think to add on from a speech pathologist point of view, it will go back into number one. Do you really know where your strength is? What exactly is your strength? And when I say strength, it could be how you pause yourself, how you insert certain intonations, how you play with the variations. That is about your delivery. So that is a beauty of everybody, because every one of us is so unique in delivering our message. So know your strength would definitely increase your confidence. That would be first thing. And then second thing, yes, just like what Diane said, you need to be confident. When I say confidence, it's be comfortable with your own color. Say, I come from Hong Kong. I know I do have a Hong Kong accent, and I'm proud of my accents. You can judge me, but this is who I am. So I think it's feeling comfortable about who you are and bring that color into wherever you are.
Actually, we've received a sort of similar question from Caroline, which is to say that she's a teacher in a Canadian school and she's being judged for her Singaporean accent. Is there any way to actually change the accent, improve her accent at all?
Well, what accent do you want? I mean, that's always the question. People come to me and say, I want to lose my accent. I say, okay, well, which accent do you want instead? Every single person in the world has an accent. And Carolyn, my kids go to your school, so I guarantee I will not be judging you if I meet you on campus. But it's a problem, especially in the international school community, because they pride themselves on saying that they only hire native English teachers, right? And what does that mean? Again, it's the Western native English. And so when we have Singaporean native speakers on campus, people tilt their head and go, oh, well, I thought it's only native speakers, right? Because they aren't educated about what native speaker really means. So I can understand how the judgment comes. But any way to improve, I mean, this is the problem. We can't think of accents as good and bad, right or wrong, right? They all have their own beauty, and we have to accept that. People are still going to judge it, of course. But as far from an accent perspective, it's making sure you're understood, not trying to change the accent. I agree with Adele completely that you have to be proud that it's such a huge part of your identity, and you have to be proud of that. And I mean, look at someone like Lee Kuan Yew. I think he's such a great example. When you hear his speeches, he's immediately identifiable as a Singaporean. Yet there is no question what he's trying to say. Everyone can understand every single word. So if you go back to any old recordings from Lee Kuan Yew, he's such a great example, I think, of a powerful Singaporean speaker who made an enormous impact on the world and maintained a very obviously Singapore English accent. So try to reframe it a bit in your mind about what's good and what's bad, or think about the efficiency part, that what Adele and Diane were speaking of too, how to be most effective and efficient in the speech. But unfortunately, and I know the school, I know the international school community here, it's going to be very difficult to get around those kinds of judgments, unfortunately. But I think it will change, like Serene said, and Diane, I think, said, with time, we're going to see this change. And the more that we, like in this panel, are talking about it, the reason why we do this is hoping that we can start creating more change in these opinions.
For the rest of the attendees, if you guys want to ask any questions, just type your questions in and we'll try to answer as many of them as we can. So just feel free to type any questions that you want. I think further to sounding, perhaps Adele can answer this, which is there a way to sound, to sound better, to sound, because I think I went through your course before about resonance and about, kind of just generally sounding better. And I think some of it is accent, certainly, but some of it is also just the pure quality of the voice.
Yeah.
So I think we did, who was the guy? Morgan Freeman? Was it Morgan Freeman? And how wonderful his voice was? Yes.
Yeah. So yes. So thank you. So I think how do we sound better? How do we voice better? Yes. So the people who attended my course would learn about voicing, and it's about mechanic, focusing into your vocal cord. And a few tips, you know, probably we could all think. Now, when we want to sound better, number one, I always talk about, do you know who you are? Some people, they are naturally having a higher pitch. So if you want, say for example, in my case, when I first started my career, it's very difficult because I do have a higher pitch of the voice. And when I talk to my client, when I used to still see my client, I intentionally lower my pitch and to make myself look more professional. But I figure that is actually not helping me. So in order for us to sound better, the number one thing we need to find is about optimal pitch. And a simple exercise could then be, everybody, you know, on your seat now, you can just touch your nose and then you can make a sound by, Do you feel a vibration on your nose?
So much noise in the panel.
Yeah. So then, in order to find your optimal pitch, we actually can vary and then look for it. So for example, let's find 3 pitches. If you vary this, find out which level you have the most resonance, most vibrations on your nose. That level of pitch is your optimal pitch. What I always tell my client would then be, find that most resonance and then try to link into your natural conversations using that natural pitch that you're having. However, if you're practicing for your public speaking or speaking to a bigger audience, try to vary and using 80% of the time, your optimal pitch, varying to 20%, then you would actually sound very, much better. The second thing that I would encourage everybody to do is, if you want to sound better, if you have, a bit of stage fright and you're afraid to speak in front of others, try before you speak, drink a lot of water, plus yawn a lot. Yawning actually help you to relax a lot of your muscles so that your jaw, your oral motor muscles will be in a relaxed state and you could articulate and speak clearer. That would be the 2 key tips that I would encourage everybody to try.
Okay. For the sake of the attendees, no one is watching your video feed. So yes, feel free to touch your nose and yawn and drink more water. Yes.
I also can't hear you, so go ahead and hum.
Yes, we can't hear you either. So go ahead and hum. Yes. So if you have any other questions, just put it into the chat. And actually, I wanted to ask Diane, because I know you've been doing a lot of work looking at linguistics. Is there anything in particular that we should be aware of if you're going to a new place? I know you teach non-native teachers how to teach English. So is there anything we need to be aware of?
What I do, most of my non-native teachers are from China and they have particular issues. So we work with those particular issues. They do things like they tend to, they turn a final L into a vowel. So instead of bottle, for example, you'll get bottle. Or instead of in, they'll over nasalize it and they'll go ee, not in, but ee. So for that does interfere with understanding, and that also affects how they're perceived. It makes people think you've got a really China accent. So you teach them simple things like, okay, when you say things like and, in, make sure the tip of your tongue touches the back of your teeth. In, okay, in. Yeah, and then because in Chinese, I don't think you end with you ever end with a consonant. So you have things like ender, butter, and, but, and those do also interfere with understanding. So just and, stop there, and, but, or teach them how to go on to the next word.
So, I mean, to flip the question around, Willem is asking, because he is a native English speaker, how can he confirm that students are understanding what he's saying? The other way around.
Ask them concept checking questions. Never ask your students, do you understand? Because you'll go, yes, teacher, yes, teacher. And like, you test them and then, no, obviously you didn't understand a word I was saying.
Yes.
So a concept checking question is a question designed to test, did you understand the concept behind what we were learning? So when you're teaching, say, comparatives, Bill is taller than Harry. One of them is 1.5 meters, one of them is 1.6 meters. Which one is 1.6 meters? That's a concept checking question.
Anything else the rest of you want to add in? Or Heather, since you are the only native speaker, how do you know when you look at others whether they are understanding you or you know, nodding and smiling?
Well, I mean, I don't know, you were asking from a teaching perspective, so that's, you know, I would totally agree with Diane. That's exactly what I would do as well from a teaching or training perspective is the concept checking, not actually a yes or no, do you understand? You can't do that. And it's the same in the workplace as well. I mean, if you just say, understand, anyone have a question, it's like, nobody's going to speak up. Everyone just says, oh, of course, boss. Yeah, boss, I understand. No, you don't, you know? So it is about asking them to repeat their understanding of the instructions given, or, okay, so tell me, what exactly is it that you're going to do in this report? Tell me again, you know, after I just explained what I'd like you to do in the report. And those are the best ways to do it. But what's difficult in many corporate situations now is that everything's on teleconference and we can't see each other. We don't know who's listening. We don't know if they're getting anything we say. Everybody is very quiet, just as we're trying to respect each other in the panel by not jumping in or making noise when the others are speaking. The same is happening on a conference call. People aren't jumping in. People aren't, you know, it's a lot harder to check for that understanding. And we often don't know that there's a misunderstanding until much later. And then we have to do a lot of backtracking to fix these misunderstandings. So it is really important to be checking for understanding by truly checking, not just asking, are you with me?
And a real life example is like, yeah, a real life example is now I work in an MNC. So day to day, definitely have a lot of time we find people actually not understanding. But in order to do, you know, in order to make sure people are on the same page, what we do is actually, can somebody else try to summarize what we have just discussed? And then you can basically check on the paraphrasing or summary that could help.
I just wanted to point out, it's not just a native, non-native speaker thing, or a global issue. It is a people issue. It is a communication issue.
Yeah, totally.
Regardless of who you are.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Charlene says that she speaks a lot. And I think this question is probably more for Adele. She says some days her voice is like perfect, projected, and other days it's not so ideal. So anything that, you know, you can share with her on it?
Yeah. So I don't know whether, you know, because it depends on, you know, what your profession is. Say in the past, so thank you, Serene, for demonstrating drinking water. It's important, by the way. So if you figure that you, in your day, you have to check, you know, the patterns. When do you feel, you know, the voice is losing, or does it happen after you get certain cold, or is that after you meet certain group of people that could be psychological? Because a lot of research actually shows that over 60% of the time, a lot of our voice patients are actually psychological. So it's a lot of different factors, but without knowing what exactly is your situations, it may be difficult for me to really give a specific answer. But general rule would then be, if you are feeling tired after whole day speaking, then what I would suggest is steaming exercise. Steaming could be as simple as, you know, you go back home, you put, you know, a cup of hot water, and then you just, you know, try to get the steam by sucking in through your nose. Then you got your steam, you got the moist, and then you do a bit of circular massage at your throat area. So what I normally advise my client to do would be, you do circular, firm type of pressing on your throat, circulating that roughly 15 times. And then you do another steam, and then another 15 times. So do it every night before bed. That would be what I usually do, especially in the past when I need to do a lot of seminar. Every day I would do it.
Yes, very good tips. But I'm very curious about when you said it's psychological. So
Yeah.
does that mean that if I go up on stage and I speak and I lose my voice, like I'm afraid of the people, I don't like the crowd? I mean, what is this about psychological?
So yeah, thank you. Great question. So sometimes I think my ex-clients, they have certain people, say for example, there is a very horrible boss that they're working with, and every time before the meeting, they were just starting to feel tense. Maybe they have symptoms, for example, having diarrhea right before the meeting. And then afterwards, then you would feel the tensions. But then that is specific occasion. So what I usually ask my client to do is, notice when that symptoms, it could be you feel dry, you feel strained, you feel, tired, and then mark all these symptoms. What I always ask them to do is, right before you notice all these symptoms, what is the situations? Sometimes it could be the boss. Sometimes it could be, I don't know, go on public speaking, you go on a stage. So try to do a bit of analysis across time. Could be past 2 weeks, past 3 weeks. Try to analyze what is causing that. And you can then find out, is that because of overuse of voice, or would that be because of psychological?
Okay. All right, fair enough. Charlene is also asking about written communication. So I'm not sure whether Diane or Heather wants to take this. When speaking to the world, should we use an American spelling or a British spelling?
I understood it more in speaking.
Okay.
Because she uses the word advertisement or advertisement. And the way I understand, unless she's added something about writing.
Okay.
But this.
So yes, it's pronunciation. So yes, it's my mistake. Because when I see British American, I tend to immediately go to spelling. So no, yes, she means pronunciation. Yes, that's totally from me. Yes.
Yeah.
Can I jump in on this one?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, okay. If you listen to my accent, I have a nowhere accent. It's a little bit British. It's a little bit American. What I've been told is that I have American intonation and British pronunciation, which is probably about right. So it doesn't matter. Sorry, Charlene, is it? Yeah, Charlene. So your pronunciation is your pronunciation as long as it's clear, as long as people know which word you are saying. I don't think it matters too much. You don't need to put on an accent. You don't need to develop an accent other than the one you have.
I think Joel asked a similar question, which is accent neutrality. So he wanted to know if there, I'm not sure what he meant by talk a little about, maybe is there such a thing, or can we develop it,
I would say that there's no such thing as a neutral accent. Every single accent says something about who you are, where you're from, and where you've learned your English. Adding to the British American thing, because this is a very, very common question I get from my clients, and there are a few different ways to look at it. I mean, easy for me, I'm American, so I use my American pronunciations. That being said, I know that my accent has changed very much in the 17 years I've lived abroad and through my work and everything else, because when I go home, they say I talk funny. So things happen and change, and there are lots of different influences that come in. But I think what's important is that you're consistent. So there's different ways to look at it when you don't have a British or American accent and you're trying to choose, should I say advertisement or advertisement, then it's thinking about who your audience is. Now, the specific question was saying it could be mixed. Well, then do what's true to you. If, sometimes I have clients that come to me and it's specifically because their American boss can't understand them. Okay, well then we better work on American style pronunciations, intonation, word stress patterns, and so on, if we have to please that specific individual. Some companies have language policies around British or American English, and that's going to be seen a lot more in the written communication than the spoken. But then it's important to follow whatever the language policy is for your company globally. Many companies haven't gotten to that step where they start looking at these global language policies, and they're actually very important to have because they guide and help people make these kinds of decisions. But really, when we're looking at speaking, if you're speaking at an international conference, you need to be consistent in your pronunciations, especially with your vowels. So if you trend towards British vowels, use them all the time. Don't start with path and then switch to path. Keep your vowels even, because people are tuning their ears to your way of speaking, and when you switch it suddenly, they get confused. And I know I'm not even great at this, because I'll say root and I'll say either and neither instead of either and neither, which would be my native accent. But just due to where I am in the world, I pick up other pronunciations. So I think we're all becoming kind of a hodgepodge. But the final note I would say on that is that when we look at English being used and being taught globally, it is beginning to trend American. And that's due to YouTube, it's due to movies and music and media and Hollywood. So I would say to people, and it's not because I'm American and I think it's the best, but I can see it happening in the world, that even international varieties of English are trending a more American accent. Look at the international schools. The language is spoken by all these kids when they use it as a lingua franca. It is very much on the American side. So I think as we go forward, we're going to see more American sounding pronunciations, and we even see them moving back to the UK now as well. So it's a whole nother discussion actually on the future of English and where we see it going, but that would be my last input on that note on the pronunciations.
I wanted to add that there's a linguistic process called convergence, where your language tends over time to get closer to a person that you feel an affinity for or like. Conversely, it also diverges. So if you don't like this person, your language tends to get further apart, much more different. So if you like the people you're working with, and you will just speak to them more, and they'll speak a bit more like you, and you'll speak a bit more like them, and everyone will meet somewhere in the middle, and eventually you'll all understand each other.
Does this also apply to spelling? Okay, that's my question, but does it also apply to spelling?
Okay, spelling. If you want to spell something, again, just be consistent. Don't spell color with a U 1 minute and without the other. Just keep it consistent. American spelling, American throughout. British spelling, British throughout.
Consistency.
All right, yes. And from Joel as well, a different question, which is, we talk so much about being judged on accents, but do we get judged on voice? I mean, like, he heard that people with lower voice gets voted in, you know? So, I mean, maybe Adele can talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. We got judged basically every single thing. You know, speaking, voicing, how do you look, even how we look, how we talk now, we are judged by every one of you maybe here, right? It's just happening, it's natural. But it's specific to voice, I think it would be quite interesting. So in my class, usually what I do with my students would then be, you know, I would give you a blind test, you know, I would just show you a video recording or just let you listen to the accents of certain people. And then I will make my student to guess, you know, what do you think is the background of that person who was speaking, you know, what's the culture. So we got judged, and then it's quite funny that the judgment come from a lot of stereotype. The stereotype actually could give a certain, you know, identity of the individual. So that is a functionality of, you know, judgment. But to answer you, yes, we do get judged all the time. The moment you open your mouth, even when you say people judge you. So what I think is important is being judged is something unavoidable. But again, are you comfortable with your own color? That would be the key things I think we all should think about.
Okay. So not to sort of change your voice, like lower it to make it sound better or more authoritative, you know, or.
I think, yeah. So I like changing for the sake of, you know, with a purpose. So you are always, you know, welcome to change or alternate. But then what do you want to serve? If you work on a day-to-day from a speech pathology point of view, we actually want you to sound natural. However, if you are speaking, you want to speak in a more authoritative voice. Sometimes certain sentence or certain words you may choose to lower a bit of your pitch or slow down a little bit. Insert a bit of the pausing. Maybe that gives you more variety and that serves the purpose rather than, you're just changing every single sentence. It's inserting impactful changes, but keeping your consistent way of communications. That would be most powerful.
We develop a lot of bad habits growing up, so you end up with a voice that maybe isn't your natural voice because you've forgotten how to breathe properly, for example. So we tend to get stressed, we get tight, we get anxious, we have really shallow breathing only into the chest, and it makes our voice higher. So what Adele does so well is to help you identify where is your normal, where is your natural pitch? How do we relax and breathe properly and project the voice from the right place so that we can best maximize the vocal range? And that's what a speech pathologist and voice therapist can do for you. And it's an area that I don't go into so deeply, but that's what Adele is so wonderful at doing. And I love, Adele, that you say, it's about making you sound normal and natural. It's not about changing who you are. But the most famous example is Margaret Thatcher, who went to a voice coach to lower the pitch of her voice, because we know for a fact that deeper voices are equated with more power, just because of all those biases that are rolling around in our brains from growing up, right? We have the father figure, we have the male politicians, we have the leaders, the kings, and so we equate deep, low power, powerful voices and not girly, sweet, bubbly, light-hearted voices, right? Or my valley girl, like that's not taken seriously. So it's great to work with a voice coach like Adele to find out how to maximize your power in your speech. There's a lot that can be done.
Thank you for advocating, Heather.
William, a similar question, which is, how can you command authority without being loud, without having to try and talk over somebody? How can you command authority?
So I can start first. I think command authority is so much about it. Number one is actually your presence. Let's not talk about whether you open your mouth or not. Is in your inner state, because communications is about a lot of waveform, and those waveform is not just from the sound wave. So in order to command presence, your mindset has to be ready. So if you're at a work setting, if you have serious thought, I think one key thing as a commercial leader, probably meditation really help to clear all the busy thought and think, be really focused about what you want to say. So start from a mindset. And then in order to command authority, the pacing is much, much more important. Now, when I say pacing, because some people in general, they speak really fast. That serves certain purpose. But then in order to command presence, get people have time to digest and listen to you, you actually need to speak at a phase where people can digest with you, leave them some room. That would be the pacing. And then the third thing, from a voicing point of view, yes, certain words lower a little bit of the pitch that could give you the authority. And more importantly is your body language, because again, speech pathologists would always look into how you communicate, what gesture you're using, are you your angle of your head, or what hand gesture you're using. These would be simple tips that we would suggest, and I would like to invite other panelists like Diane or Heather to comment as well.
I'd like to tell you a story. I was at the supermarket some time ago, and I was just sort of hanging out with my husband. We were doing the groceries, and then these kids with a grocery cart running around without their parents ran into me from behind. So I turned around and I went, subconsciously, I went full teacher on them, full discipline teacher on them. So it was just a complete change in bearing, complete change in stance. Very quiet, nothing, just turned around, stood there, centered, solid as a rock, and went, "Where are your parents?" And the two kids just sort of and the parents were like, sorry, so they won't do it again. And my husband looked at me and went, Wow.
He
So
sees it.
it is a lot about your, yeah.
Okay.
It's a lot about bearing eye contact. You don't have to be loud, but it's all in the bearing. You must be centered. You must be focused, and you must know what you want to say.
Yes. Okay. I mean, a last question from Joe. I think, yeah, this is 9:20. So last question from Joe. He says, you know, for Singaporeans, I mean, are Singaporeans generally intelligible to the world international audience? I mean, what do other people think about the way we speak?
There can be issues with the Singapore accent because of the way it tends to be, people perceive it as rapid fire because a lot of Singaporeans face more or less equal stress on every syllable. So if you would be able to sort of change that, stress the syllables that are normally stressed and de-stress the ones that aren't, that would go some way to being intelligible. That would go some way to being more easily understood.
My comment is that I'm not Singaporean, and from a speech pathologist point of view, I think Singaporean generally are really intelligible. And it's not really from articulations or accents point of view. It's about how you use your word. A lot of it, you know, Singaporean, what I noticed, you start your word by using verb. Do it la, can la, you know, you start a lot of verb, and then that could drive a lot of actions in order for people to understand. So from an intelligibility, there's no problem. But maybe from a grammatical point of view, that could be another topic. But intelligibility, totally no problem. That's my view.
Okay, I'll come with a different perspective. I think that none of us can accurately answer this question because we all live here. We hear the accent every day. We have very close contact with the accent. So for all of us here, it's completely intelligible because we are listening to it and dealing with it every single day. So no matter what accent we are talking about, whether or not it is intelligible is completely and totally based on the listener's contact to that accent. Have they ever heard it before? If they have not, they're not going to understand Singapore English. If they have, they will. When I first moved here, I mean, now I have zero issue. My mother is visiting at the moment. She can't understand a single taxi driver. She cannot understand a single waiter or waitress. If she was on her own, placed in the city, she wouldn't be able to do anything on her own, basically. She has a very difficult time understanding. Okay. This has to do with contact. It has to do with age. It has to do with international exposure. Whereas, you know, when I arrived as well, think about it, I was an English teacher, I had a background in linguistics, I was teaching pronunciation and articulation, I was hired to walk right in and begin training 1,800 pilots at a certain airline in this country. And I walked in, another teacher was running the course the first week before I could take over. And I left the first day going, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Because I can't understand a word anyone is saying. And that's when it hit me what an important area of work I was in, because I thought, what's the American boss from Texas in oil and gas? How on earth is he doing business when he gets off the plane here and he has never been in Asia and he has to communicate? And it comes from both sides. I would say that that person has the larger responsibility to, before he comes, learn about the language that is used here, because he is the guest. He should not be expecting other people to communicate in a way that he can understand. He needs to figure out how to best communicate and understand others. And that's exactly what I did when I landed. I immediately started listening to the radio like crazy. I took taxis everywhere and I talked to every single taxi driver. And I said, what? I'm sorry, what? Could you say that again? And I was just trying to train my ear because it takes contact. So that's a very difficult question to answer because it's going to completely be based on who you're speaking to and their experience and international exposure to other varieties of English, and especially Southeast Asian varieties of English.
I think earlier, Heather, you shared 3 tips for being more intelligible. Mm-hmm. And I presume also, I think as well, we spoke about the speed of speaking. In Singapore, we speak fairly fast. So I was just wondering whether if, I applied those 3 tips, as well as slowed down a little bit in how I speak, that will make me a lot more intelligible to others.
Those are primarily, the research that's been done is is talking about English as a lingua franca. So it's when non-native speakers primarily are coming together and using English as a common language. Then those 3 points are the ones that will make you most intelligible. But non-native speakers and native speakers hear the language differently. A native speaker is going to be listening more to stress and intonation and the patterning of the speech. And this is why, as Diane says, you know, by getting better intonation and better pauses and the pacing, so that you aren't so rapid fire, da 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 da, but that it's da 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 da, right? That is going to be more appealing and give more meaning to someone like me coming from the Western world, native English speaker. If you're speaking to non-native speakers, then the focus is on the sounds, and especially if they're at a lower level of English, and most Singaporeans are going to go out and have a much higher level of English than others in the region and most of the world, because you are practically native, if not native. And so then the focus is on getting those sounds consistent and getting them clear and crisp, articulating word endings, having pauses, slowing it down, using the intonation, all those other things, but really focusing on the sounds. And then those 3 tips I mentioned will be most important with other non-native speakers who are listening for sound and putting the words together and not getting as much meaning from all the tonal variations. And that's what the native speakers are listening for.
Okay. All right. So it's almost 9:30. I just want to ask the 3 ladies whether you have any last words that you want to share. Anyone can start. Who wants to have the last word on the last word so that one can go last? So I think Heather started just now, right? I think does Diane, did you get a start? Do you want to start?
I don't think I had any famous last words. But I think it's good to do our best to understand our own filters. It's good to do our best to understand our own language filters. We need to understand where we're coming from, so that, because we hope other people will understand us. We want other people not to judge us. We want other people to understand us, but we need to first do that for other people.
Great one. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
I'm happy to go next. So yes, my consistent message is always about knowing who you are, be very comfortable with, you know, who you are, but playing the variations of your, you know, of your own voice, of your own characters, that would make you a very powerful speaker. And especially the advice for non-native speaker, including myself, if you are thinking about, you know, getting into speaking space, just take the step out, because as a non-native speaker, there are so many self-limiting beliefs that, you know, we think we couldn't do it. But I have to say, I've been enjoying speaking, even though I'm a non-native speaker. So enjoy the journey.
And Heather?
I think my parting words would just be to say that the world needs your voice. The world needs to hear your voice, your accent, the way that you speak English, the words that you use, the tones you use. The only way that we can make this movement go faster, to get towards this idea of global understanding faster, is to have more and more people speaking up and being heard all over the world. And we need more people from Singapore on TEDx stages and online and doing online sales or YouTube videos or whatever, speaking at the conferences. We need to have more variety of accents that are being heard globally, because that's how we can increase this contact and have people start getting more familiar. And the more they hear the accents, the easier they are to understand. So if we're ever to reach this idea of non-judgmental global understanding, speaking a common language in all different varieties and ways, we all need to do our part to speak up and share our voice and our message with the world. So please, everyone on this call, do that. And don't worry if it's bad English. As long as you're understood, then you're speaking bad English perfectly.
Right, so thank you very much, the 3 of you ladies. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate the expertise. I appreciate the insights that you've really shared from all of your work and your research. For those of you who are on the call, actually for anyone who's registered, I will make a 2-page summary of everything that we have shared, and I'll send it out to you as a handout. The recording, the full recording of these panels will also be ready. Once I've gotten them from Zoom, I will send that out as well, and it will also be available on YouTube. So my next panel is going to be on the 5th of September. It will be about women. So this one we are talking about, I have this accent that I'm being judged. The next one we're going to talk about will be gender, gender diversity, and whether there is an issue with, women and men communicating or making an impact on the world. So that will be what we're covering. It'll be on the 5th of September, first Thursday of the month, same thing, 8:30 p.m. Singapore time. I have a panel every month. If you would like to be subscribed to it, just please let me know and I'll subscribe you guys to it. We have a panel, different topics for every month. So thank you so much, ladies. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your expertise. And for those of you who have logged on, I'll be closing down the attendees shortly. So if you get a notification that you got kicked out of the room, it's because we closed down the attendees and so the attendees. So that's just basically it. But thank you so much for coming by. All of the people have attended. I really appreciate your time and your effort in supporting the panels that I do. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye guys. Bye bye. See ya.